Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to recommend 10 adult fantasy standalones that I think you should check out. Now if you're unaware, a couple of months ago I did a similar type of video and I will link that part 1 in the cards up above so that if you don't have enough books on your TBR already after watching this video, you can put the 10 standalones that I talk about in that video on your TBR as well. Now I've said it before and I will say it again, I do think that a good adult fantasy standalone is a hidden gem within the genre and that it's good to pick up for just about everyone, whether or not you're a fantasy veteran or somebody completely new to the genre. So I do have 10 to talk about today, so without further ado, let's just get into the list. And the first one that I have is an original fairy tale. So I do think that this is great if you like fairy tale retellings, pick up this original one. And that is The Forgotten Beasts of El by Patricia A. McKillop. Now I do know that this author has written a lot of original fairy tales. This is the only one that I've picked up to date, but I definitely want to pick up more by this author because this was a great read. In this one we follow Sybil, who is a female wizard, and she lives alone in her castle together with all of her magical animal companions, and you can see some of them on this beautiful cover. One day, a baby arrives on her doorstep, and of course this changes the rest of her life. This is only 200 pages, it's a very short book, and I do think that going in you need to know that this is an original fairy tale. So often fairy tale retellings will delve a little bit deeper and flesh out either the story or the characters of the original book or story that they take a lot of influence from. In this one, it stays very much on the surface, like most original fairy tales do. So do know that going in, that the characters aren't going to be very fleshed out, that the story is quite simple and that you have like one main message, like a fairy tale. But if you're not really troubled by that, pick this one up, and especially if you like animal companions, because there's more than enough of those in this book. Next up, I have another very short fairy tale, but this is a fairy tale retelling. And if you have watched some of my last videos, you know that I absolutely adore this one, and that is The Raven and the Reindeer by T. Kingfisher. This is a Snow Queen retelling, and in this one we follow Gerda, who is on a journey to rescue her friend who has been abducted by the Snow Queen. And on her journey she meets some animals, you know, the Raven and the Reindeer, so she meets a raven and she meets a reindeer, as well as some other people who help her along the way. I loved this one. I loved Gerda as a character. I loved how she changed, and I loved her journey. Not only her physical journey, but also how she just changed and viewed things differently after, and how she grew up on this journey. I really enjoyed this one. It's more of a darker retelling. It also has some darker humor, but just the entire atmosphere was beautiful. And I do think that here, between the two that I already recommended, you can see a very big difference between an original fairy tale and this fairy tale retelling that, even though it's only 200 pages, I felt was a little bit more fleshed out. Now, next up I have another book that's perfect for winter. Actually, The Raven and the Reindeer, as well as this new one, are both winter recommendations that I put in a previous video that I will link in the cards up above, and that is Spinning Silver by Nomi Novik. So I recommended Uprooted by Nomi Novik in my last Standalones recommendations video, but I do think that Spinning Silver is actually the better one. This is also a fairy tale retelling, but if you don't know that going in, I don't think that you would notice because the influence is like barely there. And this is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, by the way. In this book we follow Miriam, and Miriam is the daughter of a moneylender. But her father is the worst moneylender ever because he is not really very strict, so a lot of people just don't pay him back, they don't respect him at all, and because of this Miriam's family is very poor. One day she's had enough of all of it and she takes over her father's job, and she's ruthless. And because of this, the rumor starts that she can turn silver into gold. This comes to the ears of the Winter King, and now he demands of Miriam to turn his silver into gold, and otherwise bad things will happen. This has some Jewish representation, so if that's important to you, definitely pick up this book because I do think that it was done fairly well, and I've also heard from people of the Jewish community that this was done fairly well. And we don't only have Miriam as a main POV, she starts as a main POV, but then we get other POVs as well, and I actually adored all of them, and I think that they were done very well. This is more of a colder read, of course. I loved the atmosphere, I loved the fairy tale-esque aspect here, because even though the influence is barely there, you do have that feeling throughout the entire book. I must say that there's a very small romance in here, and I think that Nomi Novik is just not really good in writing romance, because I didn't like the romance in Uprooted, I didn't like the romance here, but because it's only 5 to 10% of the story, it's not a big deal. So if you're going in expecting the best romance ever, you're not going to get it, but also, don't hold off picking this one up because you don't like romance, because like I said, it's barely there. Next up, I have a very well-known fantasy standalone, but it feels like a lot of people don't recommend it, and I will, because I thought that this was a great read. And that is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I know that a lot of die-hard Brandon Sanderson fans say that this is the worst entry in the Cosmere. First of all, I do not agree. I think that Mr. and Error 1 is a lot worse than Elantris. Second of all, I think that I know why Sanderson fans don't really like this book, and I think that it's not a fault of the book. I think that it's the fault of the expectations when you pick up a Sanderson book. But I will delve a little bit deeper into that after I talked about the premise. So in this world you have the city of Elantris, and this used to be a magical city where godlike humans came to live. Prior to the last 10 years, some very lucky people would undergo a transition, and when they woke up, they were Elantrians. They were godlike, they had magical powers, and they were allowed to go and live in Elantris, where they could use this magic system to help the people. Now, 10 years ago, something happened, and nobody understands what happened, but now this transition is more of a curse. You wake up, your body is deteriorating, it's like your body died, but your soul doesn't really realize it, so you're almost like a zombie-like person. And now Elantris is a prison for these people. Now, in the beginning, we meet a crown princess. She's from far away, but she's going to the city next to Elantris to marry that city's crown prince. When she arrives, she hears that the crown prince died and that she's basically a widow now. What she doesn't know is that, in truth, her crown prince underwent this transition, and in the middle of the night, hush hush, he is set into Elantris. Most people think he died. He didn't die. And we follow these two people's POVs. Now, the reason why I think that most Brandon Sanderson fans don't really like Elantris is because most people like Brandon Sanderson because of his hard magic system. They say, yes, his writing style is pretty simple, it's nothing really special, but his magic system is amazing. Now, in this one, the magic system doesn't really play a big role because they don't really know how the magic of Elantris was used. And a big part of the story is actually finding out how you could use this magic. So you don't have a hard magic system here. And if you want that going in, I can understand why you're disappointed. On the other hand, I think that from everything that I have read by Brandon Sanderson to date, the characters in this book are his best by far. And I will repeat saying that sentence until the day I die. The characters here are a lot better than in Mistborn Era 1, in my opinion. The villain in this one, it's a priest, and it's amazing. I like what he did with religion in this one, so if you don't mind it not having a hard magic system, pick this one up, because I think that it was great. Now, next up, I have a completely different book, and that is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. So this is a Greek myth retelling of Ariadne, who was the sister of the Minotaur, and also their other sister. So it goes a little bit back and forth, but Ariadne is more of the main POV, of course. This is, like I said, a Greek myth retelling. I quite enjoyed it. It came out last year, but it's more to the core of the original myth. It doesn't really add much to it. It's the original myth told from Ariadne's POV. It's a more feminist retelling than the original myth, of course, which you do expect because the original myths were not really feminist friendly. But other than that, nothing really extra happens. So if you do want an expansion of the original, you're not going to get that here. But if you just like the atmosphere of Greek myths, and if like me, you don't really know a lot about Greek myths, you're not going to mind that it's just the retelling and nothing more. Also, I really like the writing style here. I know that a lot of people like Circe by Madeline Miller, and I love that one. I also really enjoyed the writing style there, but it's very whimsical and it's very poetic almost, and for some people it might be difficult to get into. This one is beautiful, but it's not that poetic and that whimsical, so it's easier to read in my opinion. So if you're looking something like that, definitely pick up Ariadne. Next up, I have a book that I have a full spoiler-free review for, and if I have something like that for any of these books, I will link it in the cards up above and in the description box down below, by the way. And that is The Bone Maker by Sarah Beth Durst. So in my last video, I think that I recommended Raise the Sands by this author, which is another adult fantasy standalone, and I do think that that's the better read, but I really like The Bone Maker as well. I think that Sarah Beth Durst has the ability to really have a very unique magic system, a very unique feeling world, and very well fleshed out characters in just a standalone. I don't know how she does it, but she does all of these things. In this book, we have bone magic, of course, and we have 3 types of bone magic, so I really thought that the magic system was quite interesting. And in the beginning, we follow our main character, who was the big hero in a war 25 years ago, but in that war, her husband died, and now she's trying to revive him using bone magic. But for this, she needs to use human bones, and that is illegal. Now, I thought that that was going to be the entirety of this story. It's not, it's only the first 100 pages, and then this really opens up to more of a story of the reluctant heroes who need to save the world yet again. I quite enjoyed it. I had some minor issues with it that I talk about more deeply in my spoiler-free review, so if you want to know, you can watch there. But all in all, I do think that this is great for people who maybe come from YA fantasy and now want to delve into adult, but also if you like that story of the reluctant heroes, and if anything from the bone magic side of the story sounds interesting to you, then yes, definitely pick it up. Next, we have a book that I do not already own, unfortunately, but I read it a while ago and it really left a long-lasting impression on me. And that is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. In this book, we delve deeper into the myth that pregnant African slaves who were thrown overboard during their journey to the US actually gave birth, and that their offspring became mermaids. Now, we are following one of these mermaids, and her sole task in the group is to remember everything that happened to her ancestors. Now, this is almost a curse. This is very hard on her mental health, and we follow her. So this is more of a story about generational trauma. And my only issue that I have with this book is that I wish that it was longer. It's a novella, and I think that the topic of generational trauma is so important, especially for outsiders, to learn a little bit more about. And because it's such a short book, it only stayed on the surface. But it left such a long-lasting impression on me that I do think that the author did a great job. It's beautifully written, and our main character's journey is really important and such a unique way of telling this story that I must recommend it. But I wish that he delved a little bit deeper in what this means to maybe make an outsider better understand, if that makes sense. But highly recommend it. Now, I do have 3 more books on the list, and the next one is one that I definitely don't recommend to everyone, but if you like literary fiction and fantasy that leans more towards literary fiction than maybe your epic sword and sorcery fantasy, I do think that this might be one that you love just as much as I did. It was my number 2 of 2021, so if that says anything, there it goes. And that is The Binding by Bridget Collins. So in the standalone, we follow Emmett, and Emmett is going to be trained to become a binder. Now, a binder in this world is somebody who can bind memories into books. And after you went to a binder, you don't remember anything of those memories. You don't even remember going to a binder. In the beginning of this book, we know that something happened to Emmett, and we don't know what. And this creates a feeling of tension, a feeling of dread. While you're reading the book, you know that something is there. And then around the halfway point, we get a flashback. And now everything is clear. And then the second half of the book is actually also very enjoyable, even though you now know what happened and this mystery is gone. Now you have a mission. And I love this book. It does what I like best in books, where you do have that your entire perspective changes because now you have new information. And because of this, I definitely want to reread this book again. I know that most people say that this is a quite slow book, and that's true. But the atmosphere that you have in this book is just like no other, and that's why I would recommend, if anything like this sounds interesting, definitely pick it up. The next book that I have here is a lot shorter, but it's also more on the literary side of fantasy, in my opinion, and definitely not for everyone, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. In this book, which is only 200-ish pages long, we follow Piranesi. And Piranesi lives in a very big building. He thinks that this building might be never-ending, and it's made up of very big rooms that are filled with pillars and weird statues. Piranesi lives here alone. There is only one other person that he sees sometimes, and this person is called the Other. Now, this book is written in journal entries by Piranesi, and it's very weird. It's very strangely written. You have some journal entries where Piranesi is talking about, this day I went to this room and I found a couple of weird things, and now I'm going to completely explain to you how they look, and that's it. So it might be a little bit difficult to understand in the beginning where this story is heading exactly, but because it's so weird and because you have that mystery, you just keep reading. The writing style here is beautiful. I have heard that Susanna Collins' other book, which is more than 1,000 pages long, is completely different, but that the writing style, and if you like this writing style, if you like how beautifully written it is, you'll probably like that other one as well. I'm sold. I'm definitely going to read that one. And I think if you like The Binding, you might like Piranesi and vice versa, because even though they're completely different, they do fit in that same little subgenre of fantasy that's more literary fiction, I think. And the same can probably be said about the last book that I'm going to recommend today, and that is The Queens of Innislayer by Tessa Grattan. I again have a complete non-spoiler review for this one that I will link in the cards up above, but this is a King Lear retelling, and it's beautifully written, in my opinion. It's extremely slow. I love slow books, and for me this was too slow at times, but it's so beautifully written that you don't really mind. You have complete sections of this book that don't really tell you anything about the characters. They don't tell you anything about the plot progression. They just are there to create an atmosphere. They describe the setting, they describe the scene, and they do so masterfully. So if anything like that sounds interesting to you, definitely pick it up. The main character here is Elia, who is one of the daughters of the king, but you also have some side characters, and to be honest, the side characters were almost more interesting to me. What I liked most of all in this book, besides the beautiful writing style, is the magic system. You have a magic system that is closely connected to the stars, and this is the new magic system. And because of this, the old magic system is now no longer used, and it's even no longer really allowed, or it's looked down upon if you use it, and that is magic that is more connected to the soil, to the woods, to the earth. And I like magic that's connected to nature, so of course I'm going to like that as well. So if a slow book with beautiful writing style and maybe a little bit weird and atmospheric sounds interesting to you, then I do think that the Queens of Innislayer might be a great pick. So those are all of the 10 standalones that I wanted to talk about today. Please let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are, or if you've added some of these to your TBR. Also, if you have a great standalone that you want to recommend to anyone, let me know in the comments down below. As always, I hope that you enjoyed the video and see you next time. Bye!